Book 2, The Miracles That No One Wanted to Believe, 1501 to 1511. Chapter 6, The Child Who Absorbed Sins. Corinthians 11:13-15. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. The gift of truth. The morning sun struggled to seep through the grimy stained glass windows of St. Clement's orphanage, spilling translucent blotches of a weary, dull light, like the coagulated blood of an exhausted sky collapsing, fragile and powerless, like a row of cards struck down by autumn. That fractured clarity, born of glass that had once been sacred, dragged with it the echo of forgotten councils, the ruins of the Vatican, and the withered oaths of the custodians of silence. All of it converged upon that 7-year-old child, Lucius, seated in his usual corner, among muted games and rocky murmurs, there where the shadows thickened, as though his very flesh sought refuge in a secret still far too remote to step into the light. His small hands, already marked by the first signs of stigmata, toyed with a hardened piece of bread that he never quite managed to bring to his mouth. For the hunger that consumed him was not of this world, but of a hidden design awaiting its voracious and implacable hour, a prologue to a judgment destined to darken the minds of men and to fracture the very core of the earth, upon which rose, proud and vulnerable, the greatest and most powerful of the metropolises of the Middle Ages. Why does he never eat with the others? Tommaso asked in a low voice, the oldest boy in the orphanage, gripping his wooden rosary tightly, as though within its beads he might find the answer no one dared to speak aloud. He paused, lowering his voice even further, as if he feared the walls themselves might be listening. But my uncle, who serves in the papal guard, swears he saw him refuse the consecrated host, and that it turned to ash in his hands. His companion, a skinny boy named Pietro, no more than 8 years old, shrugged as he cast a furtive glance toward Lucius. Brother Lorenzo says that the chosen are nourished by divine grace, he murmured, though his voice trembled, unsure of the meaning of those words he scarcely understood. The tense silence that followed was broken by the creak of the heavy, rusted hinges of the oak door. Almost instinctively, all the children rose to their feet as Brother Metatron crossed the threshold. His tall, skeletal figure did not command authority, but something far darker and more concealed, a primitive, stubborn fear. He was, without doubt, an intimidating presence, casting a long shadow capable of devouring the morning light that scarcely dared to appear in those early hours of the day. His bandages, perpetually soaked in fresh blood, exhaled a metallic odor that mingled with the stale incense and the immaculate dew of the morning. That collision of aromas, between the sacred and the corrupt, night and day, seemed to embody a macabre and poetic contrast, almost brimming with symbolism, as if his mere arrival suspended the world in an endless prelude to a storm-laden condemnation. Today is a special day, little lambs, you must not fear, Metatron announced, and his voice crackled like a fragile parchment being torn. The Lord, in his unfathomable mystery, has granted us the grace to witness the unbreakable force of his divine justice. Behind him, 2 papal guards dragged in a chained man whose body bore the unmistakable signs of a recent beating, violacious bruises, open lacerations, and the lingering tremor of flesh subjected to contempt. His very intrusion was enough to make several children recoil with an instinctive shudder, as though a somber wind had torn through the stillness of the hall. The prisoner, of Herculean build, possessed a face mapped with scars that intertwined like rivers of contained violence, the reliefs of a geography shaped by war and pain. With an irreducible gesture of arrogance, he spat on the floor, the blood-tinged projectile struck like a mute profanation, saturating the air with the metallic stench of disdain, insolence, and blasphemy made flesh. Quite a spectacle worthy of profane altars, the prisoner bellowed, his voice ringing harshly, like torn iron. Did you bring your flock of altar boys to witness how a wretched man is consumed, not in blood, but in the ignominy of his shame? As he spoke, he set his chains ringing with a metallic crash, like the tolling of funeral bells calling forth an inescapable judgment, a portent of endurance and the shattering of all repose. Metatron did not deign to answer the affront. His eyes, shrouded in shadow beneath the bandages, settled directly upon Lucius. "This man has confessed to 3 murders," he proclaimed in a rasping voice, like parchment coming apart, yet he refuses to bow before repentance for his mortal sin. "The Holy Father has decreed that it shall be you who absolves him." Lucius slowly raised his gaze. His eyes, vast and dark, returned the light in an unnatural way, as if instead of reflecting it they devoured it, harboring more darkness than any child should bear. "He does not seek to be forgiven," he finally uttered, in a deep voice far too mature, as if he were speaking from centuries asleep within his flesh. "Exactly, brat," the murderer spat, bearing a toothless grin that looked more like a skull's grimace. "I need the blessing of no cursed child." Metatron leaned toward Lucius and let his blood-stained hand come to rest upon the child's head. The fresh blood, still warm, flowed down like a profane oil, consecrating in red the golden hair that seemed to burn beneath his touch. "It is not his desire that matters," he intoned in a deep voice, like the echo of a temple collapsing at the heart of the world, "but the eternal will of God, who rules over the mirage of man's free will, for he who wounds with iron shall be broken by iron. Fulfill, then, that for which you were conceived, be the instrument through which souls shall find redemption amid their invisible chains, and release from their torments the spirits that still lie troubled in the darkness." With the unforeseen weight of sudden spontaneity, the atmosphere in the hall grew increasingly oppressive and suffocating as Lucius rose and slowly advanced toward the prisoner. Though the child scarcely reached his chest, with his frail body and the languid limbs proper to his age, the murderer began to retreat instinctively, his eyes wide with a primal terror that betrayed all his former bravado. "Stay there, little devil," he stammered, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance, laying bare the fragility he had tried to conceal before. But before anyone could take notice, Lucius had already extended his small, languid hand. The instant his fingers brushed the man's wrist, something occurred that made even the guards most hardened in their trade turn pale, nearly fainting at what they beheld. Without any preamble, the alleged murderer's body convulsed violently, as if a searing bolt of lightning had torn through him. His eyes opened grotesquely wide, revealing the whites beneath his pupils, while his mouth began to move under a will wholly alien to that of the wretched captive. "I buried them beneath the olive tree, by the stream," he screamed, in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human. "The little girl cried so much. I covered her mouth, but she wouldn't stop making noise, until there was only. I had to squeeze harder. Harder?" The details that followed were so graphic and visceral that several nuns fainted. The murderer described each crime with chilling precision, including particulars that only the true culprit could have known, many of which had until then remained shrouded in doubt. When it was over, his face was covered in thick, black tears that slid slowly down his cheeks, leaving behind burn-like traces upon skin blurred by relentless blows and lashes, a transgression that, in his delirium, was transformed into sacred redemption. "You have attained redemption through the grace of the Lord's forgiveness," the voice said, grave and serene, "for he shows mercy to those who serve merely as instruments of redemption within his own mysterious design. In this divine game, executioners end as victims of their own condemnation, dragged through eternity beneath the unrelenting weight of their guilt." What kind of demon are you?" the man gasped, staring at Lucius in absolute dread, his gaze clouded by blood and the amorphous bruises that distorted the features of his face. This time, the child did not reply. He simply wiped his fingers on his tunic and fixed his gaze upon the rest of the witnesses to the event, without entangling himself in the clamor of the irrevocability of what had occurred, leaving upon the fabric dark stains that faintly smoldered. Then the silence that followed grew so dense it seemed to acquire a weight of its own, upheld by the taut bones of those present and by the spasmodic astonishment of those who still dared to remain there after what had transpired. "The child is an instrument of divine providence," he declared solemnly, though with a purulent voice, dissonant with the piety of his own words. "God has sent him to purge the corruption that gnaws at the entrails of our Holy Mother Church. Metatron nodded with irrefutable assent after the grievous and bewildering event, yet Lucius perceived with keen clarity how the monk's stigmata bled more profusely in the presence of the cardinal, as if reacting to something invisible to the others, though not hidden from the eyes of the Holy Child. "Pray for our illustrious visitor," Metatron commanded with fervor, gently placing a hand upon Lucius's shoulder, a gesture that was, at once, both comfort and warning. The child obeyed without hesitation, kneeling before the imposing figure of the cardinal. He joined his small hands, already furrowed by the first signs of the stigmata, and with a trembling yet steady voice, began to murmur, "Our Father, who art in." But he did not manage to finish the prayer. The words fractured in his throat, as if an invisible force had torn the breath from him. His lips kept moving in a convulsive silence, and the unfinished echo of the prayer seemed to remain suspended in the air, wavering between the sacred and the forbidden, between the real and the poetic, like a side trapped between two worlds that were never meant to cross. The silence of God. Then Lucius gave voice to what troubled his soul, and this time it was a truth his mouth could not silence. Red as an apple from the sacred vineyard, there rose the sublimation of the price of an ineffable truth, that those children, flayed alive, had been the murderers of the one who, by his own hands in this existence, bore the judgment of executioner and judge at once. Before such stripped and discreet confession, Cardinal Orsini began to cough violently, clutching his throat with his gloved hands. At first, only a few drops of blood stained his carefully trimmed and perfumed beard, then a dark smoke began to spill from his mouth with each convulsive spasm that racked him with pain and terror, as if his body were trying to expel the vile compendium of sacrilegious sins that had at last found their inevitable outlet. Something is burning me from the inside," he screamed, in a voice that was no longer his own. "Priests! Monks! Help me and tear my skin away, because it burns." But no one moved. All remained frozen, stunned, and helpless, as flames began to pour from the cardinal's eyes, nose, and mouth. Most harrowing of all was that his garments did not burn, the flames devoured only his flesh, clinging to the fine vestments and imposing jewels that were gradually revealed amid the venerable Cardinal Orsini's fatal undoing. It seemed that this combustion did not arise from earthly fire, but from something far deeper and concealed, an invisible purge that consumed not only his body, but the very essence of his guilt, as though the resulting conflagration were kindling the mortal remnants of his physical form with visceral clarity. When the fire died out, leaving behind a mound of ashes shaped like a human form, the silence of uncertainty became absolute. The last perceptible sound was the faint clink of the cardinal's amethyst ring as it struck the thin layer of limestone, travertine, and polished tuff of the floor. The jewel rolled slowly, tracing a small arc until it came to rest, with a dying glimmer, precisely at Lucius's feet. The child picked it up with a sacred curiosity. Yet within the gemstone something, a tiny form, imperceptible at first, seemed to writhe and scream without uttering a sound. Looking closer, Lucius discerned a miniature human figure, its face contorted by the unmistakable expression of eternal pain, trapped within the ring's purple glow like a condemned soul enclosed in the womb of its own penitence. That same night, as the orphanage sank into an unaccustomed silence, so deep that even the echoes of the corridors dared not breathe, Lucius awoke with a start, seized by a sharp and unrelenting pain in his stigmata. Yet the blood that flowed from them did not fall to the ground as nature would decree. Instead, it lingered suspended in the air, slowly dancing until it formed burning words that illuminated the gloom with a spectral glow. "I am not your instrument." Outside, in the orphanage gardens, all the roses withered in unison, as if an invisible blight had crept into the very heart of their roots. Their petals, blackened and brittle, fell one by one, resembling petrified tears upon an altar of ebony and obsidian. And somewhere far away, in a forgotten cell beneath tons of concave stone and an oppressive silence, Isadora de Lunae opened her eyes for the first time in 7 years. Her breath, faint and uneven, rose like an unfathomable omen of her own destiny. A new world, unbeknownst to it, had just awakened with her. A slow smile wove itself across her gaunt and absolved face, and her teeth, gleaming with a supernatural luster, seemed to frame the perpetual darkness. The duality of faith. Not long after the events that had shaken the corridors of the infants' complex, a tranquil twilight bathed the courtyard of St. Clement's orphanage in scarlet hues. Cardinal Orsini, certainly not the same one Lucius had reduced to ashes, but rather his second cousin, whose sole purpose likely lay in the pursuit of some succession or advantage following the death of his closest relative, though no less avaricious and suspicious than his kindred predecessor, then crossed the threshold with a ceremonious stride and the full confidence of one who knows himself the rightful heir to God's treasures on earth as in heaven. His purple cloak, embroidered with threads of gold, dragged dust across the worn flagstones, while his eye scrutinized every corner with a calculating avidity and a condemning disdain. "Ah, the little prophet himself," he exclaimed in a voice that sought to sound jovial, though it rang false and petulant against what until then had seemed the place's continuous and silent prelude. Lucius, seated beneath the olive tree that cast its shadow over the most secluded corner, slowly lifted his gaze from his book of Psalms, the one he used to read in moments of reflective stillness. His eyes, those black eyes that seemed to contain all the darkness of the world, met those of the prelate. In less than a blink, Brother Metatron emerged from the shadows of the cloister without warning, his bandages stained with a dark, weathered red that never quite dried nor fully renewed itself. "Your Eminence honors this humble place with his visit," he murmured, bowing his head in a reverence that failed to conceal the tension knotted in his shoulders. Consequently, Orsini ignored the monk with contempt and moved swiftly toward the child, kneeling to meet him at eye level with the creak of aged knees. "All of Rome speaks of your special gifts, little one." Lucius promptly closed his book with a measured gesture. "Have you come to test me, Cardinal?" he asked in a clear voice, far too serene and mature for his 7 or 8 years. "As one tests a horse before even buying it." In the alleyways that coiled around Campo de Fiori, where the scent of spices mingled with the rancid, putrefying stench of piled refuse, discussions about the so-called Holy Child took on a more visceral, almost profane edge, as if holiness itself had descended into the mire to contest its truth among men and beasts alike. "It's a demon in the shape of an innocent child," shouted Beppo the butcher, slamming his fist hard against the fine wooden table in the corner tavern. "No child should possess such power, least of all one that brushes against that of the very prince of the pit himself. Ever since that cursed day, my wife hasn't stopped praying over what happened to the other Orsini." Mariasha, the tavern keeper, wiped down the counter with a rag fouled with alcohol and blood, casting a pointed look at the patrons with her sinewy arm. "My cousin served in the late cardinal's household," she said in a low voice this time. "What that child did was mercy compared to what that pig dressed in purple used to do to the maids and concubines." A young man as well, dressed in garments far too fine for such a shabby place, who until then had remained silent, raised his voice with firm conviction. "The problem is not the child," he said cautiously, though his tone carried a wary boldness that soon hardened into defiance, "but what the church will do with him." As he reached for the jug of wine, his hand revealed the seal of a papal holy scribe. In the sumptuous, chiaroscuro private chambers of Pope Calixtus III, where Flemish tapestries delicately and elegantly muffled all sound from without, the pontiff, aged and poisoned by years of hatred, resentment, and subversion, knelt before the personal altar that accompanied him in his most intimate reflections. His hands, marked by age and by the illness that devours time, trembled slightly as they held the gilded crucifix. "What is this child I have created? Like that God who boasts of his creation, or not?" he murmured to the figure of Christ upon the wall, surrounded by such luxury as the human Redeemer might never have enjoyed in all his life. "A divine gift, or my punishment?" Behind the dividing wall, Cardinal Borgia, young, ambitious, a prospect of power and dangerously intelligent, qualities that had propelled him swiftly through the rings of clerical greed, stood motionless. His silhouette blocked the natural passage of light through the balconies, cut out sharply against the stained glass of the holy chamber of the papal apartments. Holiness, the people are divided, as in the ancient days of the empire. The pious call him a saint, the superstitious fear him as the devil. He paused with cold calculation, and the shrewd wonder what secrets he might reveal were he to lay his hands upon certain dignitaries. Calixtus slowly turned his head toward a small window once used to quarantine several popes during the deadly plagues that ravaged medieval Rome. Now his eyes, clouded by age yet still intimidatingly piercing, shifted back to that narrow opening before the sumptuous pontifical balcony, and he said, "Are you suggesting that we eliminate an innocent Rodrigo?" Borgia inclined his head with feigned humility. "I merely suggest that even God's instruments can become dangerous in the wrong hands, nothing more, Holiness." Back at the orphanage, Lucius sat facing Cardinal Orsini beneath the small olive tree that served as a passageway for reflection and recollection. The air was steeped in a woodland scent, a mingling of damp earth, aged parchment, and the melted wax of candles that flickered restlessly in the distance, between the tree and the silent quarters of the orphanage. "What do you see when you look at me, little one?" Orsini asked, unable to fully conceal the tremor in his gloved hands. His fine vestments exuded a faint scent of exotic perfumes, a blend of noble woods and myrrh, which seemed more a disguise of holiness than a sign of devotion. Lucius tilted his head, studying the cardinal with the cold curiosity of a naturalist confronted with a strange insect. "I see a man who traded his faith for a noble title," he said at last, with a serenity that froze the air between them. "And a blonde little girl who weeps in a cellar, near the river." Orsini rose so abruptly that a pile of dry leaves collapsed around him. "This is blasphemy," he roared, his face aflame with rage and rancor. "The devil speaks through your mouth, impious spawn." Metatron, who stood very close by, intervened with the surprising agility of a man marked by constant pain. He placed himself between them, raising a trembling yet resolute hand. "Lucius's gift is like a mirror, Your Eminence," he said in a harsh voice, his tone laden with calm admonition. "Would you blame the mirror for what it reflects?" The child extended his small hand, stopping both adults short. "Do not be afraid, Cardinal," he said with an enigmatic calm, almost sacred. "Your sins are already written in a book that does not belong to me." At that precise instant, a thunderclap tore through the horizon, making the ancient walls of the orphanage tremble and heralding the storm that was gathering over Rome. Orsini understood then, with his soul knotted in a primordial dread and an indescribable sensation, as though thousands of bubbles were forming with precision and wariness within the tiny space they occupied, why even demons believe and tremble. In the most recondite depths of the Vatican archives, where secrets older than the Church itself lay buried beneath centuries of pious lies, those very lies that had led entire generations of pagans to the vile, searing fires of hell, it was not merely a sentence pronounced from the world of mortals, but the pain of a justice that does not arise from unbridled vengeance, rather from the unwary ignorance of an incomprehensible system seeking to settle its own debts and misfortunes. Then Brother Metatron lit an oil lamp. Its flickering light revealed walls covered in alchemical symbols and a black, grimy mirror that reflected no image at all. "It is growing faster than expected," he murmured into the darkness. The mirror, veiled by an inner mist that seemed to exhale from another plane, revealed for an instant a tall, dark figure, stripped of any defined contours. "Do you doubt now, after all that we have done?" whispered a voice that sounded like metal scraping stone, cold and harsh, yet laden with an ancient familiarity. "And yours?" the mirror asked as the image faded. "What will you do when he discovers what you did to Isadora?" The monk did not reply. Instead, he clenched his bleeding hands in a gesture of pious resilience, allowing the pain to rise like a mute prayer toward the void that watched him from within the mirror. Chapter 7, The Blood That Wrote the Truth. Proverbs 12 verses 19 to 21. Truth endures forever, but a lie lasts only a moment. Truthful lips stand firm forever, but those who speak falsehood will perish. Evil will not go unpunished, but those who seek justice will find life and peace. The language of angels. The radiant, glacial moon of that night bathed Lucius's cell in a spectral silver when pain tore him from sleep amid an almost divine stillness, broken only by the intrusive glow of the nocturnal orb at its zenith. It was not the sharp pain of the stigmata reopening, but something deeper, more intimate, an inner sensation, as though his bones were trying to rend the flesh from within, yearning to transform themselves into a new manifestation of the ignominy of his irrevocable becoming. Suddenly, he struggled upright, pensive, agitated, still ensnared by drowsiness. His small fingers clenched the sweat-soaked sheets, while his gaze, trembling and adrift between wonder and terror, swept across the cold cell. In the dense penumbra, the words written in blood upon the walls seemed to come alive, dancing in time with his ragged breathing and the visions that enveloped him, like a surging overflow of madness and revelation, a living prayer inscribed with the pulse of the unknown and the incomprehensible. "Here it begins again," he whispered, striving not to make the slightest sound, as he gazed at his palms bathed in flashes of scarlet and silver, where the skin split slowly in a sinuous, bifurcated dance between good and evil. It was not, in truth, blood that welled forth, but something thicker, darker, and deeper, shimmering with a faint bluish glow amid the darkness. Metatron entered without a sound, as always. But this time, Lucius noticed something different in his gaze. It was not just the usual blend of devotion and guilt. There was fear. "Tonight is different," said the monk, watching as the drops of that strange liquid began to form letters on the stone floor, while stony figures seemed to rise slowly from the very surface of the rock, as if emerging from reality itself. "The language is becoming clearer." Lucius lifted his gaze, and in his black eyes was reflected the wavering flame of the candle Metatron held with a trembling hand. "Or perhaps," he said in a serene, almost childlike voice, yet laden with unfathomable knowledge, "you are learning to read it better." The silence that followed was broken by hurried footsteps in the corridor. The door burst open, revealing Cardinal Borgia, this time without his usual masterful composure. His face, normally flawless, was pale, beads of sweat ran down his temples, some slipping from the outer corners of his eyes. "It's happening," he exclaimed urgently, without his usual affectation. "In Florence, in Venice, the parchments we copied, they are reproducing themselves on the walls of the churches." Metatron slowly turned his bony neck toward Lucius, whose face bore a comprehension that chilled the blood and gradually transformed into terror. "What have you done, child?" he murmured, his voice laced with bewilderment. Lucius extended his hands, where the dark substance now formed complete words, destinies inscribed in tongues no mortal was meant to understand. "It is not I who does it," he said with preternatural calm. "It is the truth." He then lifted his gaze toward them, and his voice became a channeled whisper, almost reverential. "And the truth is like fire. Once unleashed, it cannot be contained." Borgia stepped closer, his voice reduced to a whisper thick with dread. "Pope Calixtus has convened the secret council," he said, his tremor barely restrained. "They fear that this may be the beginning of the final judgment." A soft, serene laugh slipped from Lucius's lips, so unexpected that it made both men step back. "The final judgment does not come from above," he said, pointing to the sky with a slow, serene gesture. "It comes from below, from the mass graves that lie beneath your palaces, forged in divine tyranny. From the screams you have silenced in silence." In the secret library, chaos reigned. Brother Benito, normally the calmest and most reserved of the monks, stood atop a table, shouting with exalted fervor the final lines that had appeared on the main parchment. Brother Benito lowered his voice, his face contorted with fear. "This is not merely a warning, it is a sentence," he exclaimed, letting the parchment fall, which crackled as if it were burning from within. Brother Lorenzo, in a corner, tore parchment after parchment in a frenzy of inconsolable despair. "No matter how many we destroy, at dawn, perfect copies appear in every church in Rome." The youngest, Brother Thomas, knelt before the original text, his trembling fingers tracing the words written in that dark blood that still seemed to pulse upon the parchment. "What kind of miracle is this?" he asked, his voice quivering, fractured by a reverential terror that bordered on awe. Meanwhile, in the streets of Rome, crowds began to gather before the churches where the words appeared overnight, as if the very stone itself were confessing its secrets. An illiterate cobbler, aided by his daughter, read aloud the accusations glowing on the walls of Santa Maria in Trastevere, his voice trembling between disbelief and fear. As the phrases took shape, a reverent silence fell over the people. Each word seemed to reveal the sins of all and of none, awakening in them a profound reflection on the impending cataclysm, the weight of repentance, and the mystery of atonement. It was as if all of Rome, for the first time in centuries, remembered that sin was not merely punishment, but understanding. And that soon, very soon, all of Rome would find a better life if, in that moment, it deigned to take the hand of the Lord Jesus Christ and follow his path. Or, failing that, to be led without light, submissive and purified, toward the kingdom that men, in their delirium of holiness, had proclaimed as promised. One that on earth they could never truly enjoy. For in their weary hearts, in their souls torn by sin and poverty, an ancient hope began to take root, one that smelled of redemption, and of the end of a suffering that had begun the very moment they were born. Yet, in the darkness of the mind, that which, when cleared, brings clarity to the spirit, they harbored the divine ultimatum as the apocalyptic omen of which all spoke, but which no soul had yet truly experienced in the condemnatory fragility of human humiliation, ruthlessly cast into the discernment of their own judgments and wickedness. The fifth sin: you have sold your spiritual children like flocks of sheep, idolizing pagan gods disguised as control, and adorned your altars with the gold of their suffering, while they themselves find redemption through the violence and injustice of their peers. The murmur of the crowd grew, a mixture of horror and vindication. For the first time in Rome's history, the power of the church faced something stronger than its armies, more persuasive than its grandiloquent sermons, the indisputable truth emerging from the deepest recesses of minds warped by the pain of what once might have been the humanity of the redeeming Christ, now existing only inscribed in the blood of a child who could not be silenced. Back in his cell and bedroom, Lucius gazed through the narrow window as the first light of dawn stained the sky, leaving only the silhouette of imposing Rome beneath a cloak streaked with scarlet and sulphurous tones, as if painted in oils upon a wall. Despite the overwhelming permanence of all that dwells in the natural world, the truth was that he knew what was coming, and that did not make it any less fleeting against the contrast of the imposing sky. The words were already written on his skin, in his blood, in the very air he breathed, also inscribed upon that firmament overflowing with illuminated hues that few could comprehend, and even fewer interpret in their true magnitude. In a matter of hours, those rays, and that beauty would no longer appear the same to the eyes of unflinching humans, for what approached belonged neither to the realm of light nor of shadow, but to a design that exceeded the will of any creature born under the sun. Many believed that this was the consequence of various manifestations, not unrelated to a cyclical replication of nature, yet this day was different, special. Others, however, remained in the skepticism of a mind that sleeps beyond its own convictions. But these were not their signs. They never had been. They were the accumulated cries of centuries of victims, finally finding voice and timeless resonance, without justice or vain mercy. Metatron, kneeling in a corner, reproached the child with a mixture of terror and devotion. "What comes now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, blending with the silence of the new dawn, amid the distant song of birds and the stifling disorientation that precedes death, like the faint crackle of a body surrendered to its clandestine cremation in the world of the empire of control. A kingdom exercised through different means, that is to say, whether in the future we will labor to acquire the whips of our own executioners. Lucius slowly turned his head, his eyes reflecting a light that came neither from the candle nor from the dawn. "What always comes after the truth," he replied calmly. "Wrath. And then, purification." Outside, in the distance, the first cry of reform rose, the voice of the young philosopher Machiavelli, beginning to pierce through the crowd. It was still a faint sound, but unstoppable, like a tidal wave. A divided populace, which had shattered the remnants of ancient empires, was awakening. And now, like the blood still flowing from Lucius's hands, the letters slowly traced themselves across the stone floor, forming a word that would make the foundations of the Vatican tremble. Revolution. The failed censorship. The secret courtyard of the Vatican seemed like a miniature hell. The flames of the large central brazier licked the night sky with orange tongues, illuminating the tense faces of the 7 cardinals gathered there. Brother Metatron, his bandages imbued with the smell of gunpowder and fear, held the final parchment in his marked hands. "This is the final text," he announced in a grave voice, barely rising above the crackle of the devouring flames that at times seemed to overtake them. "It contains the accusations against the College of Cardinals and their Vatican delegates." Cardinal Borgia stepped forward, his amethyst ring reflecting blood-tinged glimmers and shadows that seemed to flicker by, though in truth they were not there. "Burn it! Let not a single word survive," he exclaimed, his voice laced with suspicion. His voice, normally firm and authoritative, cracked on the final syllable, while his noble feet seemed to lose strength and vigor. Metatron nodded with sacred obstinacy and let the parchment fall into the searing flames. For 3 eternal seconds, the material resisted the flames. Then, with a supernatural snap, the words written in Lucius's blood began to glow with a bluish radiance, before disintegrating into ashes that spiraled upward toward the sky. "It is done," murmured Grand Inquisitor Torquemada, wiping his hands on his cassock as if he had soiled them with something that neither fire nor faith could erase. "Without proof, these slanders will cease to be words, and silence will serve us better than any absolution." A harrowing scream tore through the air like a divine knife slicing the night. It came from the eastern tower. All present recognized it instantly. It was the voice of Lucius. When Metatron burst into the room, he found Lucius writhing on his narrow bed, his small hands clenched into convulsive claws. The wounds of the stigmata, once discreet and silent, had opened like carnivorous flowers, revealing within them throbbing layers of skin and muscle. "What have you done?" Lucius gasped, lifting an accusing gaze. His voice carried its own echo, resonant, repeating at the end of each phrase, as if multiple voices spoke through him in unison, then added their respective comments, intertwining in a murmur that seemed to emanate from beyond his body and the mundus of the soul. Metatron approached cautiously, yet with the firmness of one attempting to tame a wounded beast. "It was necessary, little one," he said in a whisper trembling between reason and fear. "Those words, they were causing chaos in your perfect lie." Lucius's voice rose, firm, with a tone that no longer belonged to a child. "There were wounds. There now appeared seared words, etched into the flesh with an almost divine, or profane, precision. You shall not build your kingdom upon the bones of the innocent." The monk stumbled backward until he struck the cold wall. This is not possible." "It is." Lucius slowly lowered his feet to the floor, the contact of his bare skin against the cold stone echoed like an omen. He rose without the slightest hesitation, with the calm of one who has already seen his destiny and fears it not. "For what you burned was neither ink nor parchment," he continued, his voice serene, almost liturgical. "It was the truth." He raised his marked hands, the glowing letters seemed to breathe, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "And the truth," he whispered, letting the silence complete the sentence, "is reborn from its ashes." At that instant, an icy gust swept through the cell, and the torches extinguished one by one. Only the light emanating from the child remained alive, flickering like a flame that did not belong to this world. The parchment glowed faintly with an inner light, as if a living ember breathed beneath its surface. The letters, once traced in the dark ink of the scribes, now moved with a will of their own, reshaping, growing, and multiplying upon the very material that contained them. Brother Benito, his mouth half open and eyes flooded with tears, barely managed to utter a perceptible murmur. "It cannot be. I saw it. It's the same. Word for word." His bony finger pointed to an addition in the lower margin. "The words burned will return 7 times stronger." Brother Lorenzo, normally the bravest of the monks, hurled his workbench against a shelf. This is the devil's doing. No miracle defies the laws of nature like this. A violent knock at the door interrupted the argument, leaving no room for objection. The sacristan brother burst in, panting, his face gaunt with terror and his eyes wide as if they had seen the unspeakable. "Come quickly," he shouted, clutching the door frame to keep from falling. "In the Sistine Chapel, the walls, they are speaking." Michelangelo would have recognized the irony. On the very walls where, decades later, he would paint his Last Judgment, the forbidden words now glowed with a divine, almost searing radiance. The crowd pressed together in the basilica, murmuring in unison like a single living being, a pulsating mass of voices, like a swarm of birds or a school of fish guided by an invisible will, while a young, trembling priest stepped forward through the throng and read aloud. "The fourth sin, you have exchanged the body of Christ for the bodies of your acolytes." The young priest's voice cracked as he continued, choked by a tremor that stemmed not only from fear, but from the unbearable weight of the revelation. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain composure, but his hands shook as he held the text, which seemed to burn between his fingers. Reference: Confession of Father Giacomo, June 12, 1498, regarding the choir boys. A sepulchral silence fell over the hall. The torches flickered weakly, as if they too feared to illuminate those words, and for a moment, all of Rome seemed to comprehend the weight of its unattainable misery. A piercing scream tore through the air. A burly man, his hands calloused from labor, pushed his way through the crowd. "That date! That day my son disappeared," he shouted in desperation. His trembling finger pointed to a specific name on the list. "And that cardinal dined in our house that very night." The murmur swelled into a roar. Outside, in St. Peter's Square, someone began shouting a word that had not been heard in Rome since the days of the Caesars. "Justice!" Pope Calixtus III watched as new phrases appeared on the wall of his private chambers, like drops of blood seeping through the plaster. His hand, marked by age and infirmity, rose to touch the still wet words, "Your silence makes you complicit." "What do you want from me?" he whispered to the portrait of Innocent VIII hanging above his bed. The painting did not answer, but in the outer garden, the morning choir began to chant the Dies Irae with unusual urgency, as if even the angels feared being late for the judgment already looming over Rome. The Pope slowly lifted his gaze from the golden rosary tangled between his fingers. A ray of light filtered through the window, catching the beads and casting golden glimmers across the adjoining walls. His voice, barely a weary murmur, broke the silence. "Face him." "The child?" The young deacon nodded hesitantly, avoiding looking directly through the small opening of the luxurious balcony, a work of exquisite and ancient architecture. "Yes, Your Holiness," the people demanded. "They say they no longer seek absolution or promises, but truth. And that only the child can give it." Calixtus closed his eyes. For a long moment, only the creaking of the parchment continuing to spread across the wall and the stirring of his mind could be heard, as if the very glass of the world were slowly cracking, letting the truth trapped within its fissures escape. "Prepare my tiara," he said at last, his voice having aged decades in mere minutes. "And bring the child before me." In the depths of the secret archives, that place where not even the most powerful cardinals could enter without prior permission or absolution, Metatron knelt before the black mirror that reflected nothing. His bandages, once white and pure, were now imbued with the same dark bluish hue as Lucius's blood, a liquid glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own under the flickering light of the oil lamp and the dying candles, which stubbornly refused to surrender their morbid luminescence. "It's accelerating," he confessed to the darkness, in one of the most secluded corners of his chamber. "The words multiply on their own now, he no longer needs to bleed to write them." The fogged glass revealed for a moment an image that seemed more real with each blink, Lucius, standing on the papal balcony, enveloped in flames that neither consumed nor redeemed, dancing as if they breathed with a will of their own. A voice then whispered, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Until the blood ceases to write, or Rome ceases to burn. Metatron rose with effort and suffering, his joints cracking like dry branches under the weight of years and secrets. He moved toward the exit, unaware that his bandages, once a symbol of purity, were beginning to seep the same dark, viscous liquid, a harbinger of the inevitable. Behind him, on the wall opposite the black mirror, the shadows moved with a life of their own, and new words slowly appeared, as if carved by an invisible hand into the stone. The Guardian shall be judged first. Chapter 8, The Mirror that Revealed the Soul of Rome. Jeremiah 23 verses 16 to 17. Thus says the Lord, do not listen to the words of the prophets who prophesy to you. They teach you falsehood, speaking visions from their own hearts, not from the mouth of the Lord. They say, peace, when they have no peace. Who will remedy their deceit? The Chamber of Horrors. The air in the morbid, hidden undergrounds of the Vatican smelled of mossy earth and bones aged by time and decay. Lucius, now 10 years old, followed Brother Metatron down a passage so narrow that the walls brushed against his shoulders and hood. The torch in the monk's hand cast dancing shadows that seemed to writhe in pain against the stone walls of the forsaken corridors, or concavities deliberately designed for the arcane. Why are you bringing me here? Lucius asked, watching his breath spiral in the cold air. Metatron did not answer immediately. He stopped before a black iron door, its hinges heavier than the knocker, yet so low that even the child had to stoop to pass through. The lock, a grotesque bronze figure with an open mouth, seemed to swallow the key that the monk inserted with trembling hands, as if it already knew its purpose. Because it is time for you to see the truth without intermediaries, he finally replied, his voice hoarse from the centuries-old dust that hung in the corridor. The one that not even your blood can write. The door opened with a groan that echoed like a lament of Lazarus returning to his rest. Inside, the chamber was small and circular, its walls covered with mosaics depicting biblical scenes. But Lucius barely paid them any attention. His gaze was drawn, as if by magnetism, to the object at the center, an oval mirror, its black frame and surface so dark it seemed to swallow the torchlight. Metatron gently pushed him forward. Look at yourself. Lucius took a step, then another. The floor beneath his feet creaked, not planks or stones, but small bones arranged like a macabre mosaic. When he was a meter from the mirror, something shifted. The black surface rippled like disturbed water. Then, slowly, images began to emerge in sacred manifestation. At once he saw Pope Calixtus III, but not as Lucius knew him. The pontiff appeared on his throne, his body infested with white worms crawling through his eyes, his mouth, his gloved hands. The insects moved to form words: hypocrite, usurper, murderer, which made it clear that the purpose indicated by the stars is not always fulfilled, but rather the design of the Absolute, who already holds a sudden awareness of its inexorable and impregnable destiny. Next he saw Cardinal Borgia, his crimson cape now transformed into living flesh, his face twisted into a demonic mask, with contorted horns and talons at his feet. From his hands dripped molten gold, which, upon striking the floor, turned into tears of children blessed by his deeds and by their faith. The bishops and cardinals of the Vatican, each reflected not as free and humble men, but in their most grotesque heretical and diabolical forms, some with fangs long as daggers, others with forked tongues licking silver coins, several with bloated bellies, as if they had devoured an entire calf, or some venomous beast of immense proportions. Lucius held his breath, neither inhaling nor uttering a word. Unlike anything he had known, the mirror did not show vain appearances, it revealed souls. And what it revealed made even his blood visions pale in comparison and contrast to those revelations. "What is this?" he whispered, unable to look away. Suddenly, that form dissipated, and at the same time, Lucius was able to regain his senses. Metatron leaned down to murmur in his ear. The mirror of eternal truth. It was brought from Jerusalem by the Templars. According to several accounts, this object once belonged to one of the demons whom King Solomon himself judged. Among its many powers, this mirror shows not what you are, but what you have chosen to be." He paused briefly and added with gravity, "But do not be distracted, Lucius. Pay attention." A new group of figures appeared in the glass, the monks of the orphanage, including Metatron himself. The monk was reflected as a man with translucent skin, beneath which black snakes writhed where his organs should be. One of them bore a name engraved on its head, like a living Medusa upon flesh, Isadora. But it was what came next that made Lucius instinctively recoil. The mirror rippled again, revealing for an instant his own reflection. Or rather, the absence of it. Where his image should have been, there was only a perfect, merciless black void, like a portal to nothingness itself, or perhaps to the very throne of the Almighty. Metatron let out a sound somewhere between a sigh and a lament. "As I feared." Lucius raised a trembling hand toward the surface of the mirror. His finger met no resistance, it passed through the glass as if it were stagnant water, while his hand sank deeper and deeper. "Why do I have no reflection?" he asked, feeling a cold that burned his skin as he touched the other side of the mirror. The answer came from the darkness behind them, in a voice that was not human. "Because you have not yet chosen what you will be, angel or demon, savior or executioner." As if alluding to a universal principle, the notion of evil as a counterbalance to good, and vice versa, the voice seemed to imply that the outcome of this world truly depends on human free will, or on our meager notion that we actually make choices, and on the possibility of choosing to exist beyond the mere material decisions that govern the moral, social, and physical order of existence. Or can man truly choose to continue existing as something more, after the loss of the body that emerged from the earth? When Lucius spun around quickly, moving away from the projection, he saw only dancing shadows on the wall. Yet, for a moment, he thought he discerned a female figure, tall, with eyes glowing in an ochre hue, like embers alight in the darkness. Metatron seized his arm urgently. "We have seen enough. Let us leave before." A dull creak echoed through the chamber. The mirror began to vibrate, and from its surface a skeletal hand slowly emerged, reaching toward Lucius in a gesture of supplication. The child had no time to react. Metatron dragged him out of the chamber and slammed the door shut in a single motion, just as 12 of those same bony hands began clawing at the other side, driven by desperate and contentious intent. Suddenly, they were engulfed by disorientation, like prey seized by panic. They ran down the corridor as the walls seemed to close in around them. It was not until they reached the moonlight filtering through a high grille that Metatron stopped, panting with agitation. "No one must know what you saw today," he warned, gripping him by the shoulders with anxious force, yet justifying himself with his own words. "Not even Calixtus knows the true power of that mirror." Lucius then looked toward the dark passage. On his left palm, where once there had been only stigmata, a word now appeared etched in Enochian, "choose." He stared at it in silence, and instinctively understood its meaning, without needing the intuitive grasp of what is true. And deep within the cryptic passages of the Vatican, the black mirror returned to its usual stillness. Yet, had anyone been watching at that exact moment, they would have seen its surface reflect, for the last time, more than a dreamlike or prophetic glimmer, the silhouette of Isadora de Lunae, smiling from within the glass with complete and enigmatic patience. The void of Lucius. The boy, now 10 years old, but with eyes that had witnessed centuries, sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at his palms. The word "choose," etched in Enochian upon his flesh, throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, as if each pulse came from a heart that was not his own. Metatron entered without making a sound, as was his custom, but this time his breathing was more labored than usual and his bandages were disheveled. He carried a silver candelabrum that cast flickering glimmers across his defined, tense face, revealing a mixture of fear and urgency that neither silence nor darkness could conceal. "You shouldn't be awake at this hour," he murmured, but his voice lacked its usual firmness. Lucius slowly lifted his gaze. "Why do I have no reflection?" he asked, his voice clear as crystal amid the darkness and the mirror's shadow. The monk let out a sigh that sounded more like a suppressed groan. He placed the candelabrum on the worn oak table and sat before the boy, his joints creaking like dry branches, adopting a posture that was both slight and weary. The mirror does not lie, Lucius. It shows the potential truth of every soul that stands before it. He paused, swallowing with difficulty. The cardinals are demons because they chose to be. Calixtus is devoured by worms because his power feeds on corruption. All of this stems from the false notion of free will that skews their behavior and reason, thus the tempters of hell lure them with lust and ambition. And me. The boy held out his hands, revealing the stigmata that never healed. What does it mean to be a void? Metatron leaned forward, and for the first time since Lucius had known him, the boy saw genuine fear in those sunken eyes, barely visible beneath the shadow of the hood. It means that you are different. That your soul has not yet been defined. His voice sank into a whisper, like that of a hero who has descended from a divine dwelling to taste human misery. Or perhaps, that you have no soul at all. The silence that followed was so dense that Lucius could hear the slow drip of wax melting at the base of the candelabrum. Outside, in the orphanage gardens, a night bird let out a piercing cry that seemed to shatter the stillness, as if even the night hid a desolate delirium in its deepest shadows. That is not true, Lucius finally replied, though his voice trembled slightly. I feel pain, rage, pity, aren't those the things that define the virtues of the soul? Metatron seemed to age 10 years in that instant. There are things older than souls, little one. Forces that existed before God ordered the world, beyond the reach of the prevailing moralism that designates good and evil on earth. He pointed to the word etched in the boy's palm. You must choose what you will be. And when you do, the mirror will show you your true face. Deep within the Vatican, meanwhile, the black mirror rippled like the surface of a lake under rain, serene and constant in its disturbance. The distorted figures it had shown before, the cardinals turned into demons, the Pope as an infested corpse, had vanished. In their place, it reflected a scene that occurred nowhere in the palace, nor in the known world. Lucius, now years older, stood atop a pulpit built from human bones, crowned with a black tiara that glimmered with an unnatural radiance. Before him, a crowd of gaunt faces reached out their hands in awe and devotion, as if what stood before them was not a prophet, but the heir of something far older than will itself. The image flickered, then shifted. The same Lucius, this time clad in rags, appeared crucified upon a door floating in the void. Around him, angels with owl-like faces circled, emitting a guttural, dissonant chant, tearing strips of flesh with silver teeth, one by one, with the ritual precision of a sacrifice without condemnation, as if the act, perverse as it seemed, were in truth a form of reverence, or revelation. A third reflection emerged, fainter than the others. A young man, clad in a white tunic, walked through smoldering ruins, his face smeared with ash and his gaze lost on the horizon. In his arms he carried Isadora's lifeless body, her hair spilling like a dark river over the dust. From the young man's eyes flowed tears that seemed like liquid gold, sliding slowly down his face and falling to the ground, where, upon touching the stones, they turned into small, withered flowers. The mirror let out a sound like a sigh, and the images faded. But on the ebony frame, almost imperceptible, words appeared carved. Every light is born of a shadow. And every shadow, sooner or later, remembers that it was once light. He who is nothing can become everything. Back in the cell, Lucius rose abruptly. Something is happening. Do you feel it? Metatron rose with some difficulty, but his eyes gleamed with unease. The mirror is active even though no one is looking at it. His voice carried the weight of a herald of terror. That only happens when... A sharp blow against the door cut his words short. Before either of them could react, the wood flew open, revealing two Swiss guards with swords drawn. Behind them, Cardinal Borgia smiled with the satisfaction of a spider gazing upon the fly caught in its web. By order of His Holiness, he announced in a honeyed voice, the child Lucius is to be taken before the secret consistory. The mirror has spoken, and its verdict must be heard. Metatron lunged forward, his bandages coming loose to reveal the oozing wounds that never healed. No. He is not ready yet. You do not know what you are unleashing. One of the guards struck him in the stomach with the hilt of his sword, sending the old monk to his knees, coughing up blackish blood. Lucius did not resist when the gloved hand seized him by the arms. But as he passed by Borgia, he whispered something barely audible, a single word that seemed to resonate beyond the air itself. The cardinal recoiled at once, as if the child had hurled consecrated fire into his face. I saw you in the mirror, Rodrigo. The horns suit you well. The journey through the corridors of the Vatican seemed to last an eternity. Lucius was led down staircases that descended in endless spirals, passing frescoes that depicted ever more ancient and more disturbing scenes from the foundational history of the Holy Church. At last, they reached a bronze door marked with symbols that made the eyes burn merely by looking at them or blinking. Once inside, in a circular chamber lit by vivid torches, 12 cardinals sat upon thrones that seemed carved from ebony. At the center, upon a pedestal of black marble, stood the august mirror. Pope Calixtus III, gaunt and wrapped in furs despite the oppressive heat of the chamber, pointed toward the artifact with a trembling hand. Look at yourself, child. And may God have mercy on your soul, if you have one. With any remaining trace of doubt dissolved, Lucius stepped forward with steady resolve, feeling the accusatory gazes of the cardinals bore into his back. When he stood a single step from the mysterious mirror, he held his breath, as if unwilling to fog it or disturb it with his breathing or his very breath. At once, the black surface churned like boiling water. For a moment, it showed only the same empty darkness as before. Then, slowly, something began to take shape. It was not his reflection. It was her. Isadora de Lunae, younger than Lucius remembered her, appeared before him. Her eyes burned like embers, and her black hair fell like the eternal night of the universe. She was in a cell, writing on the walls with her own blooded fingernails. The words were the same ones Lucius had been bleeding for months without knowing why, though now, for the first time, they seemed to carry a deeper meaning, almost revelatory. The image shifted. Now it showed Isadora kneeling at the center of a circle of salt, cradling a newborn in her arms, while monks with faces hidden beneath purple robes performed a ritual with obsidian knives. The mirror let out a mournful groan, and the scene transformed once more. Now it revealed the truth Lucius had always suspected, but had never dared to imagine with certainty. There was no human father. There was no divine conception. Only an invocation on the darkest night of the year, when the gates between worlds are thrown wide open. Only then did the cardinals begin to pray aloud, when the final image appeared before them. Lucius, now an adult, with eyes completely black and a crown of thorns bleeding gold, standing over a Vatican engulfed in flames. Then the impossible occurred, until that very moment. No more, no less, Isadora's hand emerged from the mirror, gripping Lucius's wrist with a strength from another world. Suddenly, her voice, coming both from the glass and from the boy's mouth, echoed throughout the chamber. You were born of the void, my son. And to the void you will return, if you do not choose your own path. The mirror shattered into 1,000 fragments, hurling shards like daggers that buried themselves in the assembled cardinals. Borgia screamed as one especially large splinter lodged in his right eye, melting like ice upon contact with his blood. Lucius collapsed, and in the final second before losing consciousness, he saw his reflection for the first time, not in the fragments of the mirror, but in the terrified eyes of the cardinals. A child. A demon. A savior. Everything and nothing at the same time. When the darkness dragged him under, he knew that at last he would have to choose. Why Q Roma no so breviaria a su decision? Chapter 9, The Mother's Final Warning. Ezekiel 3 verses 17 to 19. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. You shall hear the word from my mouth and warn them from me. When I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you do not warn him or speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked, and he does not turn from his wickedness or from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but you will have delivered your soul. The letter written in blood. One of the many nights that slipped by, one after another, leaving no trace, a day like so many others in that fateful course called life, the air of the convent of Santa Maria del Lanto smelled of rotting lilies and melted silver, as if corruption and the sacred were breathing in unison. Within its walls lingered the living memory of a silent past, a trembling echo that still roamed the corridors, resisting disappearance. In her gilded cell, where time came undone like wax before a flame, Isadora de Lunae knelt beneath the small window through which the moonlight filtered. 11 long years of confinement had passed, years of prayers, exhausted vows, and enforced silences, with no comfort other than that pale glow which, at times, dared to brush her face like a merciful caress from the heavens. Her fingers, slender and marked by ancient ritual scars, traced circles in the marble dust as her lips murmured a forgotten tongue that made the iron bars tremble. Sister Clara, a novice no older than 16, watched from the threshold with a mixture of terror and fascination. She was the youngest of the gatherers, tasked with collecting the silver tears that Isadora shed each night of the full moon. Mother Isadora, she whispered, holding the glass vial in her trembling hands. It is time for the gathering. Isadora slowly turned her head. Her eyes, white for the past 3 years, gleamed with a light of their own amid the darkness. Today there will be no tears, little dove, she replied in a voice that sounded like the creaking of ancient parchments. Today I need you to carry a message. Clara stepped back instinctively, though fear still lingered on her face, as Isadora extended her right hand. Beneath her pale, translucent skin, black veins traced themselves like diseased roots. With the nail of her thumb, she opened a deep cut in her left palm. But instead of blood, a thick, silvery substance flowed forth, smelling of sulfur and myrrh. What? Clara could not finish the question. Isadora did not hesitate and smiled, revealing teeth far too sharp to be truly human. With her index finger soaked in that silvery liquid, she began to write upon the stone floor, which seemed to retain the very memory of the ether. The letters glimmered only for an instant before drying, leaving behind marks that looked as though they had been slowly burned into the rock. To the boy Lucius, blood of my blood. They will offer you a crown to silence your voice. They will give you a throne to chain your feet. Do not accept their pact, my son, for the price will be your soul. When the time comes, seek the mirror that does not lie. And ask what happened the night Rome wept black tears. Your mother, who waits for you in the darkness. Isadora de Lunae. Clara read the message, her eyes widening more and more, her trembling lips repeating the words in silence. When she reached the end, a shiver ran down her spine. This is pure heresy, she murmured, unable to tear her gaze away from the still glowing letters. If they discover me. Immediately, Isadora approached with swift, precise movements, as if she were floating rather than walking. She cupped Clara's face in her hands, leaving silvery marks on her cheeks that gleamed under the moonlight. Look inside me, little one, do you see any lie? Clara held back a deep gasp. For a moment that seemed to halt time, Isadora's white eyes turned into mirrors. They revealed not pupils, but visions. First, the Vatican engulfed in flames, its domes consumed by a silent fire. Then, Lucius crowned with a black tiara, emblem of a power that should never have existed. And, finally, herself, Clara, hanging from a hook in a hidden chamber, her skin removed with the precision of a butcher. The vision vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. Clara found herself on her knees, gasping, as if she had just run for miles. "You understand now," said Isadora. It was not a question. Your death is already written. But what you choose to think of it is not. Sometimes, simply, the person who dies ceases to matter at once, and more than that, the world of the living scarcely stirs at the loss of one of its own. Because war, the true war, is to survive as long as possible in this world of rigor and complacency. The young nun swallowed, tasting the bitter flavor of fear. Then, with a determination she did not know lived within her, she nodded. "How do I carry the message?" Isadora bent down and picked up the vial of tears that Clara had dropped. With a swift motion, she smashed it against the floor. The glass fragments leapt like a handful of shooting stars. "Like this," she said, picking up the largest shard. Without hesitation, she pressed the edge against her own chest, right over her heart. The skin split open with a wet sound, but no blood flowed. Instead, Clara saw flashes of that same silvery substance Isadora used as ink. "Give me your arm," Isadora ordered. Clara extended her left arm and closed her eyes when she felt the cold glass against her skin. The pain was sharp and precise. When she opened them, she saw that Isadora was writing upon her flesh, using the shard of glass as a quill and her own silvery blood as ink upon the threshold. Letter by letter, the entire message appeared on Clara's forearm. But unlike the words written on the floor, these did not fade. They flickered and glowed faintly beneath the skin, like fireflies trapped in amber. "This will protect you," Isadora murmured as she worked. "Until the message reaches his hands." When she finished, she took a strand of her own hair, which gleamed like silver under the moon, and stitched the wound with meticulous, almost ritualistic movements. By the time she tied the final knot, Clara's skin had already healed around the message, leaving only a thin silvery trace outlining the words. "Go now," said Isadora, kissing her forehead and leaving a burning mark that smelled of herbs and incense. "And when the time comes, remember, pain is only the door. For pain arises as the punishment man must endure an inevitable price for his weakness and his limited understanding of the world. Only through it does he attain true understanding, the kind born of experience and of his own reasoning." Immediately, Clara hurried out of the cell, feeling the message throb on her arm like a second heart. She did not look back as the door closed behind her with a definitive click. She did not see how Isadora collapsed against the wall, her body convulsing as the skin over her heart began to rot at a speed visible to any mortal's eye. Nor did she hear the laughter escaping Isadora's lips, a laughter that was neither human nor female, not even of this world, but from a place that, though real, rested upon the very unknowability of reality at its utmost extreme. And she saw even less how the window bars bent inward, as if something enormous were pressing from the other side, entirely uncertain of its manifest intentions. Something that whispered a name in the darkness. Lucia Uus. In the orphanage of San Clemente, in that room he called a cell, the boy awoke with a start, a stifled scream and a groan heavy with pain. His stigmata burned like never before, and in the cold air of his bedroom, one could taste the sweet metallic tang of silver, the bitter trace of sulfur and starch. Suddenly, Metatron burst into the room, his bandages undone and his eyes bulging, like a possessed herald. "She's here," he gasped, as if he had run for miles. "The mark of your mother! On the skin of a nun who has just arrived." Lucius did not need to ask how he knew. The pain in his hands was answer enough. He knew that his stigmata revealed not redemption, but damnation. When he stepped into the hallway, he saw the young Clara kneeling on the floor, surrounded by monks praying aloud. Her left arm glowed with a silvery light, casting words upon the walls that everyone could read, yet none dared to speak. Everything was mysticism and secrecy. Ending with Isadora's message. Like the final warning. And the omen of what was to come. The messenger's price. The putrid stench of burned flesh and sweet copper filled the secret chamber beneath the main altar of the basilica. 12 black candles, arranged in a circle, illuminated the macabre scene with a flickering light that made the shadows dance across the frescoes of martyrs and saints. Clara, or what remained of her, hung a mere 2 feet above the floor, her limbs outstretched in a sacrilegious imitation of crucifixion, where redemption and damnation seemed to blur. There was no cross this time. Only the thick air held her body, as if all of Rome had held its breath before that fateful and wretched end. For it was a destiny woven by forces no mortal could fully comprehend. For in the end, even divine mercy breaks under the weight of human misery. God, in his compassion, or in his silence, grants man less than his soul longs for, yet more than his flesh can endure, the fragile and terrible chance to approach a perfection carved from suffering, imprisoned within the soul, an ideal that humanity, animal at last, barely manages to touch, while its hysterical desires blaze from the very depths of creation. Perhaps we were cast into the world by the designs of a mercy we can never fathom, born beneath the mantle of God, yet living under the cursed decree of the adversary, unknowingly, but for a just cause, under the shadow of the Christ Lucifer who redeems and condemns alike. Cardinal Borgia adjusted his black leather mask, infused with essences of mint and camphor, like one preparing to descend into a hell summoned by mortal hands. He advanced with the composure of a man accustomed to power and the silence of his own excellence, but upon beholding what lay before him, something in his gaze, usually cold, relentless, and incapable of compassion, shivered. He blinked once, and in that fleeting tremor slipped a flash of all too human horror, a fear that neither his fine robes nor his noble titles could conceal. "By all the saints," he murmured, his voice muffled by the mask. "This is not mere torture. It is liturgy." With a trembling hand, not from weakness, but from the weight of what it indicated, he pointed to the perfect geometric patterns etched into the flesh removed from Clara's thighs. Each strip of skin, still damp and taut, had been arranged with near ritual precision on the marble table surrounding the body, like the pages of a newly revealed sacrilegious manuscript. It was writing without ink, yet with pure essence, a message carved in an arcane language, chiseled in pain, and in a twisted form of redemption. A text whose mere contemplation suggested a hellish origin, and yet seemed to uphold, like a silent pillar, the foundations of both the infernal and the celestial realms. Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, approached with carefully measured steps, as if each one were an immovable decree. His nose wrinkled in distaste, even through the scent imbued in his silk handkerchief. "Observe the precision of the cuts," he indicated in a hoarse voice. "There are no tears, nor blood beneath the victim's nails. She did not struggle." He paused meaningfully. "Or she could not." Pope Calixtus III rested in his gestatorial chair within the convent, like a living relic, suspended between the gold of the throne and the shadow of incense. His eyes, two murky wells where centuries of greed and power had shipwrecked, scrutinized the scene with the weariness of one who has seen too much to keep believing. His fingers, thin as bird bones, drummed on the carved arm of the seat in an arcane rhythm, as if marking the cadence of a mass that no one dared to officiate in the name of a god wavering between complicity and silence. Was the message preserved? He asked, his voice sounding like shattered stained glass struggling to hold a forbidden note on an enchanted violin. Borgia gestured to two hooded acolytes standing to one side. They stepped forward immediately, carrying between them a polished silver mirror the size of a shield. "It was not on the skin, Your Holiness," Borgia explained as the assistants positioned the mirror before the flayed torso. "It was beneath." Then, the reflection trembled. It did not merely show the visible, but that which the human eye could not, or should not, perceive without breaking. Across Clara's living, exposed muscle, ancient words ignited with a silvery, unreal glow, as if tattooed by an omniscient hand that did not belong to this world. Isadora's warning finally unfolded, complete, each letter pulsating with its own rhythm, as if the flesh itself, or that which lurked within it, were breathing, waiting for its moment to at last reveal itself. "They will make you Pope not to serve God, but to silence you. When the tiara touches your head, it will be your soul that falls." Remember the night when the Tiber ran black, and seek the mirror that shows what the angels fear to see. A murmur of horror swept through the chamber. Cardinal Orsini, usually unflappable, made the sign of the cross with a ceremoniously trembling hand, as if, for a fleeting instant, he had beheld in person one of God's envoys, or that which masqueraded as one. "This is necromancy of the highest order," he whispered. "That Jewish which has invoked forces that—" "Enough!" Calixtus struck the floor with his pastoral staff, silencing the assembly. "It is not necromancy. It is a warning." His weary eye swept over every face. "And it will be our ruin if we do not heed it. There is always a force that makes you forget things and governs you. Your Holiness, with all due respect, are you suggesting we obey the designs of a heretic?" Calixtus rose with difficulty, worn down and partially detached from his own soul, his hunched figure casting a disproportionate shadow over the frescoes on the floor, as if death itself were waiting its hour. "I suggest, Thomas, that perhaps we have underestimated both the Mother and the Son." He coughed, a wet, phlegmy sound. Clara was not sent merely as a messenger. She was sent as a demonstration. I can craft a response that is both more believable and more unsettling, one that no one could refute or question. Then he pointed toward the corpse with his sacred staff. In the flickering light of the black candles and tapers, all could see it. The markings on Clara's muscles were not mere words. They formed a map. A precise diagram of the secret tunnels beneath the Vatican, with one chamber marked by Enochian symbols that made the eyes water as if from onion and cinnamon. "God help us," Orsini murmured. "She is guiding us toward something." In the Chapel of Mirrors, Lucius knelt before the great convex mirror, his stigmata bleeding onto the cold marble. Metatron, standing behind him, recited psalms in a tongue that made the stained glass and the foundations beneath their feet vibrate. The monk let out a sigh that sounded more like a groan than a creak. His bandages, normally white, were stained a dark red that was not entirely blood, but something more. "The message has arrived, little one. That is the only thing that matters now." "And what of the price?" Lucius straightened abruptly, with such force that Metatron stepped back. It was not only Clara who paid. Isadora did as well. "I feel it here." He pressed his fist to his chest, as if trying to hold something that was slipping away. As if someone had torn a piece of my soul. Metatron opened his mouth to respond when the chapel door slammed open. Borgia entered, followed by 4 Swiss guards whose drawn swords cast patterns of bright light across the walls and marble floor. "By order of the Holy Father," he announced, a smile failing to reach his eyes. "The boy Lucius will be transferred to the papal chambers." His gaze fell upon the bleeding stigmata, which used truth and hatred. For his own protection. Lucius rose with stunned calm, wiping his blooded hands on his tunic. As he passed Borgia, he paused and whispered something that made the cardinal turn pale. "I saw you in the mirror, Rodrigo. Your soul smells the same as dead Clara's. Of sulfur and decadent fear." Borgia staggered back as if struck violently. For a moment, his mask of authority cracked, revealing the trembling man beneath. "Take him away," he ordered, his voice breaking. "And may God have mercy on us all." Just beyond, in the forgotten depths of the convent of Santa Maria del Lanto, something stirred in the cell that had held Isadora for 11 long years. The strange thing was that the silver chains that had bound her lay broken on the floor, corroded as if plunged into acid. On the wall, written in a substance that was neither blood nor ink, but something in between, a new phrase glimmered faintly. "I have paid the price. Now comes the judgment." And in the outer garden, where no nun had dared to enter for a decade, all the roses had turned black at once. Their petals, as they fell, formed patterns that resembled letters, or something more. To names. To accusations. Meanwhile, somewhere between Rome and hell, Isadora de Lunae smiled. Her message had been delivered, and more than a warning, it was a sentence. And soon, the whole world would read it. Chapter 10, The Monastery of the False Saints. Matthew 7 verses 15 to 20. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. By their fruits you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. So by their fruits you will recognize them. The farce of the stigmata. Not far from the holy complexes, the imposing monastery of San Benedetto loomed like a shadow against the twilight sky, its towers tilted like accusing fingers, pointing straight to hell itself. Lucius, now 12, yet bearing the gaze of an old man who had seen too much for a mortal life, adjusted the thick woolen cloak Metatron had given him for the long journey. "We should not be here," murmured Metatron, his bandages steeped in the scent of incense and pus that always clung to him. His eyes, sunken in dark sockets, scrutinized the monastery's towering walls with suspicion. This place is not under the jurisdiction of the Vatican. Not even the Pope knows all its secrets. Lucius did not reply. Since leaving Rome behind, a voice had been slipping into his dreams, a whisper neither entirely human nor fully divine. "Look beneath the bleeding stones," it repeated. "There you will find your true face." When they finally arrived at one of the many monasteries that, in those times, proliferated like weeds across the fields of the Holy Empire, what was to happen did not delay. The great oak gate opened before they could knock, revealing a monk of sickly, ragged build, yet with eyes unnaturally bright, a sharp scent of urine, and a smile that exuded a kindness unsettlingly mysterious. "The prodigy child," he said in a voice that buzzed like flies over rotting flesh. "The one who carries God's words in his own blood. We have been waiting for you, boy. Come in, come in." Metatron stepped forward, his bandaged hand gripping the staff tightly. "We seek only shelter for the night. Tomorrow we will continue on our way." The monk raised his bony arm in a wide, almost theatrical gesture. Of course, of course. All pilgrims are welcome at San Benedetto." His voice dripped with kindness, yet his eyes, restless, sunk deep within the shadow of his hood, never left Lucius's bandaged hands. Once inside the monastery, the air felt dense and warm, heavy with the scent of melted wax and something deeper, more primal. The hallways were adorned with frescoes of saints in sacred ecstasy and mystical delirium, their wounds gleaming in gold and vermilion. Yet something in the expressions of the painted faces seemed wrong. Too ecstatic. Too hungry. "Our brother Gabriel will show you to your quarters," said the monk, gesturing toward a young man with an angelic face who emerged from the shadows. "After Vespers, the abbot will wish to meet the boy." Gabriel, no older than 18, inclined his head in respect. But when he looked up at Lucius, his eyes were a pale blue, almost white, like those of a deep-sea fish emerging after a long winter. "Come," he said in a voice far too commanding for his age, and yet unsettlingly sweet. Many others might have called it persuasive. As they followed the young monk through the monastery's hallways, narrow as veins carved into living stone by golems who had fought the harshest holy wars, Lucius began to sense an unease difficult to name. At first, the walls were adorned with niches of reverent ritual periphrases, as if fragments of bone had been meticulously framed, splinters of the true cross sealed in glass, and tiny vials containing dried blood, suspended like crimson dust trapped in grey amber. But with every turn of the hallway, with every step deeper into the heart of the building, the relics seemed to lose their sanctity and take on the arcane mystery of the adversary, the knowledge of this world and its workings, where humans are prey to the demon at every step and every breath. As if the false beliefs of the world were cracking, the sacred became ambiguous, entwined with demons in service. Do you not realize it? Our final design will be one that not even the apparent hand of God will be able to judge. Surely a God who will wash his hands and create another. We have squandered our efforts, and now it seems too late for anything better than what the human being truly deserves. Despite everything, the deeper they ventured, the revelations became undeniable. A finger preserved in resin, with far too many joints, seemed capable of curling by its own will. A piece of rib, unnaturally curved, gleamed with a metallic sheen under the flickering torchlight, as if it belonged to no creature of this world. And then, in a niche darker than the rest, Lucius saw a mummified heart. He could not look away. As he passed before it, he would have sworn, not with his mind, but with something deeper, that it beat. Once. Barely. But enough. Here you will rest, announced Gabriel upon reaching a small cell with 2 hard beds. Vespers begins in an hour. It would be unwise to miss it. Metatron said in a low voice, "Something is not right in this place. I've heard rumors, but this..." He gestured toward the walls, where the shadows seemed to move independently of the torchlight. The monks of San Benedetto are known for their miraculous stigmata. But no miracle smells like this. Immediately, Lucius stepped closer to the wall, touching the damp stone. What does it smell like? Of rotting flesh and fresh lies. The Vespers chant was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The monks, lined up on the choir benches, intoned psalms in Latin with voices that resonated in the bones and made the skin crawl. Lucius counted 40 men, all with the sleeves of their habits rolled up to the elbows, revealing open sores that oozed a thick, golden liquid. Right there, the abbot, a tall man whose mitre seemed too heavy for his slender neck, raised his hands in a gesture of blessing. His palms bore fresh, oozing wounds, yet unlike Lucius's stigmata, these seemed ordered. Too perfect, as if the polarity of good and evil had been deliberately reversed. A knowledge of cause and effect that added to the majesty of an internalized reflection, fully aware of a punishment that would strike with relentless precision. "Brothers," the abbot said in a voice that made the stained glass and nearby bell towers vibrate. "Today we have with us a special visitor. One who, like you, bears the marks of the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ." All eyes turned toward Lucius. 40 pairs of dilated pupils, 40 smiles far too unsuspecting. The boy immediately felt a chill run down his spine to his feet. "Perhaps after the service," continued the abbot, "our young guest might share his gift with us." Metatron gripped Lucius's shoulder tightly, but before they could respond, a piercing scream echoed from the depths of the monastery. A sound so saturated with pain that even the oldest monks shuddered and lost their composure. The abbot smiled, revealing his challenging teeth. "Ah, our new brother is ready for his transformation." In the catacombs beneath the monastery, the truth revealed itself in all its horrifying glory, a monstrosity of abomination scarcely conceivable by any mind. Lucius and Metatron, having managed to slip away amid the chaos, beheld a scene capable of chilling the blood of any man, or any incorporeal creature that walked the earth or hell. For little could be guessed of a will so misanthropic and utterly devoid of mercy, divine or human, a will that, nonetheless, seemed to govern karma and dictate the judgment of a decadent humanity, stripped of the breath of the Holy Spirit and the strength needed to endure. In an adjoining chamber, lit by torches casting greenish flames, a young man lay bound to an exact replica of Christ's cross. In the background, monks wielding ritual knives took turns making precise incisions in his palms, feet, and side, while others applied a golden substance that made the wounds gleam and ooze. "It's false," whispered Lucius, feeling his own stigmata burn in response. "All their miracles are lies." Metatron, pale as death, pointed to a corner where several saints lay on cots, their wounds being meticulously reopened by monks with golden needles and thread. "Not only false, they are manufactured." In truth and consequence, the world of appearances captivates the gaze of the unwary human, and we are the masters of this divine theater, assigning them roles in this grand performance of the world. Some will strive for the leading parts, while others will embody characters of misfortune, just as the world functions, and as the world we wish to inhabit functions. Yet even so, we will perish, having fulfilled the span of consciousness in a human experience that struggles against the adversary's impulse within each of us. Let that not be the ultimate fate of humanity, the dominion of a few who decide over stranded wills in their ignorance and despair. Suddenly, the abbot, appearing from nowhere behind them, placed his heavy hand on Lucius's shoulder. "It is all for the glory of God, child. The faithful need miracles. We provide them, and thus their faith in the church." Certainly, his breath smelled of rancid wine and something worse, as if it had been dead for a long time. Lucius then understood why the voice in his dreams had led him here. This place was a mirror, a dark reflection of what the church had become under deceit and lies. And like all mirrors, it revealed the truth that no one wanted to see. For sometimes, a mirror does not reflect what is, but what we believe we see within it, and we interpret it according to the hue we carry inside. The purifying fire. As expected, night fell once more over the monastery, draping it like a wet cloak with its pure, serene dew, heavy with the weight of unspeakable secrets. Lucius lay on his hard bed, feigning sleep while listening to the monks' whispers in the hallway. Their words formed a sinister hum, like wasps circling rotting flesh. "We cannot wait until morning," murmured Metatron from the adjoining bed, his voice barely a whisper among sheets and pillows. Though his bandages glimmered faintly in the darkness, soaked with the same golden substance they had seen in the catacombs. "The abbot knows what you are, and what you are worth. So now, more than ever, we must remain vigilant." Then, Lucius rose slowly, his stigmata throbbing with a sharp pain, like finches stabbing at pins. "They are not mere forgers," he replied in an equally low voice. "That substance they use is not of this world." A creak in the hallway silenced them instantly. Both held their breath as footsteps stopped outside their door. Only the faint light of a torch seeped through the cracks in the wood, casting shadows that writhed like worms under the midday sun. "His stigmata will protect him," the voice finally said, "until the abbot decides otherwise." As the footsteps receded, Lucius turned to Metatron, only to find the monk with his eyes closed and an unhealthy pallor, his breathing unnaturally deep and hurried. For the wine at dinner had been poisoned. With silent movements, Lucius slid out of the bed like a crustacean or a squid, and crept toward the narrow window. The moon, full and red like an open wound, bleeding and consecrated by the man who in his fury lost both his vices and his reason, shone majestically, a dreamlike moon. Its light bathed the inner courtyard, where several figures dressed in white formed a circle around something Lucius could not make out, caught between fear and terror. A piercing scream, the same one they had heard during the last Vespers of the Holy Apostles, ripped through the night with its mystery and frenzy. This time it sounded closer, more immediate, and worst of all, terrifyingly human. Without a second thought, Lucius gently pushed the door and slipped into the darkest hallway. Once there, the walls oozed a sticky substance that clung to his fingers like rancid honey and sins washed in devout waters, which could only mean that those sins had never truly been purified, and that the water, far from absolving them, did nothing but reinforce them. At the end of the corridor, a spiral staircase descended into the catacombs, from which a golden light emanated, strong and pulsating. In the depths, the scene he found surpassed his worst nightmares. The young man they had seen before now lay naked upon a black stone altar, his body covered in wounds that gleamed with the same golden liquid. But this time he was not alone. 5 other men and women, some dressed as pilgrims, others in monastic habits, formed a line leading to the altar. The abbot, now stripped of his usual ceremonial robes and all his former authority, wore a silver mask that distorted the faces of the prisoners. In his hands he held a ritual knife inscribed with markings that made Lucius's eyes burn just to look at them, as if each stroke had been written to subjugate not only the flesh, but also the hands and feet, by divine or profane command. "Brothers and sisters in Christ," proclaimed the abbot, his voice reverberating like underground thunder. "Today you shall attain the holiness you have so long desired. Your pain will be your passport to heaven." The first volunteer, a young woman with glassy eyes, stepped toward the altar. When the abbot's knife touched her palm, the golden substance gushed forth like a spring, coating her arm in seconds. The woman screamed, but not in pain, rather in ecstasy. "Holy! Holy! Holy!" the monks chanted, their voices merging into an unnatural hymn. Lucius felt an overwhelming nausea that nearly made him retch. Surely, this was not merely forgery and hypocrisy at play here. It was something far worse. That golden substance, dense and viscous, it changed people. It transformed them into something else. He stepped back into the darkness, but his foot nudged a small stone on the floor. The sound, barely noticeable elsewhere, echoed like a gunshot through the underground chamber, making it clear that this place, far from being empty, held nothing but void itself. Suddenly, 40 heads turned toward him. 80 eyes gleamed with that same golden glow, and 5 more hovered above, filling the sky like a storm that suffuses the heavens. "The stigmatized child," murmured the abbot, removing his mask to reveal a smile that split his face from ear to ear. "How timely that you have joined our ceremony." Those monks began to advance with no thought of retreat, their habits billowing like bat wings in the malevolent light, stark against the cold, grey stone and cobblestone walls. Then, Lucius felt the heat of his own stigmata throbbing, as if responding to the presence of the false and insidious within his very sentence. "You are not saints," declared Lucius, finding a strength in his voice he did not know he possessed. "You are thieves. Thieves of pain. Of faith." The abbot laughed, a sound like broken glass resonating in deep, guttural notes. "And what is faith, if not what people believe they see? We give them miracles. We give them hope. What do you give, child, except truth and despair?" A scream from above interrupted the confrontation. Metatron, pale and sweating, yet standing atop the stairs, held a torch in one hand and his staff in the other. "Lucius, run!" In a reflexive act, the monk hurled the torch to the floor, where the sticky substances on the walls received it like oil on an unceasingly blazing fire. The flames spread with frantic, almost unbelievable speed, climbing the walls like golden serpents in their splendid, sacred, and irreverent exaltation. Chaos erupted like gunpowder struck by the intense light of a crystal. The monks screamed, not in pain, but in rage and despair, as their precious substance burned around them. The abbot, however, remained still, staring at Lucius with eyes now glowing with an inner light, delivering a clear message to both of them. "This is not over, little stigmatized one. There are more monasteries. More faithful, hungry for miracles and for a heaven after death. For it is in human nature to believe in false gods and in doctrines that attempt to satisfy the ever unsatisfied need to fill the void we carry within by nature." The abbot's voice then distorted, becoming multiple, as if many throats were speaking through his. "And now we know how to make you burn." Lucius felt that those words were not merely a threat, but a sentence pronounced by something that had forgotten what it meant to be human. Namely, whether the true complicity of God and the adversary had, in fact, been to grant humanity free will as a promise of greatness and redemption, a promise that man had forgotten, like Prometheus' vivid flame fading, meant to illuminate the path of the human soul amid the complexities of its mortal destiny. For it always came down to the same thing, to reason asserting itself over ignorance, to the inner dialogue that becomes dogma, existence, and narrative, to that voice spilling over itself and onto others when only delirious minds remain, waiting for someone to teach them how to live and how to think. Surely this was one of the sins of which God would never boast in his creation, yet which, by his mysterious mercy and magnificence, he hid from the eyes of humankind and their negligence. But who was he, Lucius, and who were all those gathered there, if not yet more pieces of this grand masterpiece, both malevolent and magnificent, human and divine alike? What was that substance, gasped Lucius as they ran through smoke-filled hallways. Something ancient. Something that should never have been unearthed. Metatron coughed, his face grey from the effort of holding the poison in his system. The earliest Christians called it the manner of the fallen angels. When they emerged into the outer courtyard, the scene stole their breath away. The monastery was fully ablaze, but the flames were golden, not red, as if some forbidden power had decided to purify the place in its own way. The liquid gold of the fire licked the walls, climbed the arches, and tore through the roofs, melting stone and wood alike. And in the midst of that hell of flames and smoke, the monks neither screamed nor tried to flee. Instead, they stood motionless, arms outstretched as if being crucified. Their silhouettes were etched against the blazing glow like figures both holy and profane. And worst of all, unbearably so, was the expression on their faces. They were smiling. They smiled broadly as the golden fire consumed them completely, as if each tongue of flame were revealing a divine secret the world was never meant to know. The crackling of the wood, mingled with the almost musical hiss of that anomalous fire, formed an indescribable chant. Something that belonged neither to earth, nor heaven, nor hell, yet spoke in the language of fanatics, of the damned, of those who no longer possess dreams or will. Lucius felt his stigmata burn in response, throbbing as if they recognized the energy emanating from the living flames, like at an altar. Beside him, Metatron stepped back, leaning on his staff to keep from falling. "No, they aren't dying," he whispered, filled with terror and apprehension. "They are offering themselves." And in the heart of those words, Lucius understood that what burned before his eyes was not merely a monastery. It was the seal of something that should never have awakened. The abbot, now atop the main tower, raised his arms in triumph. "Behold the true miracle," he shouted, his voice unnaturally amplified. "The transfiguration! It destroys mortal eyes, but the true fire reveals. It reveals the hidden nature and elevates it to a state where it can be more easily seen from the throne of God, as well as from his consecration. What happens now is that the shell cracks, and our primary essence emerges, the one that existed before the flesh and beyond it. We only live the blurry memory of an earthly existence, yet we have always been eternal. Now behold your power as you are stripped of this physical shell, for it is the flesh of the martyrs that bears the cost of existence, expiation, understanding, and the very measure of transgression that can be committed in a human life. For he does not sin who transgresses the laws of God in the name of kings and their veneration, but he who dares to question the meager role assigned to him within them." Then the impossible happened. One by one, the monks burned completely, but left no ashes. Instead, small golden lights rose from their remains, floating toward the sky like will-o'-the-wisps in heavens filled with stars. It was then that Metatron fell to his knees, praying in a dead language that rippled through the air like an echo from another time. Lucius, however, could not take his eyes off the abbot. His silhouette, shrouded in the rising, fragrant embers, twisted as if the fire were revealing his true nature. Those golden flames traced him, stretching his limbs, breaking his human posture, and molding him into something that no longer belonged to the world of mortals. "This is not the end," whispered Lucius, feeling his stigmata burn like never before. "It is only the beginning of what has just transpired." When the first drops of rain began to fall, they were black as ink, smelling of sulfur and ancient lies. The monastery of San Benedetto collapsed in on itself, carrying its secrets down into the depths of the earth. Yet in the air lingered a question that neither Lucius nor Metatron, and least of all those who had already departed this material plane, could answer. How many more monasteries harbored these false saints? And what did they truly want with the stigmatized child, knowing the evil wrought by the hands of the very condemned saint?